The Europa League is an interesting competition. To some clubs it would mean the world to win the title. To others it's just a bit of a consolation prize. But it does also mean qualification to the following year's Champions League, which every club can appreciate. With that being said, here are the UEFA Europa League 2021-22 stadiums. Groupama Stadium, Lyon. Built prior to the 2016 Euros, it is regarded by many as the best stadium in France. And it does have a lot going for it. I do like the huge, jagged looking roof. It's one of Europe's largest. But the interior is even better. Not only does it look vibrant being done up in the club's colours, but the seating appears to be quite steep, which I'm always a fan of. Steep seating is only bad when it's referring to the prices. Ibrox Stadium, Rangers. A much more traditional design with this one. As you'd expect, it's over 120 years old. The exterior is mostly made up of some rather nice brickwork and some hits of glass here and there. A timeless look. As for the interior, well, it's a little more modern, but it still definitely retains a fairly traditional layout. There's something about those old-fashioned triple-tiered stands like the main stand that I like. Generali Arena, Sparta Prague. I can't help but notice the resemblance that this stadium has to a SIM card. That obviously wasn't their intent, they just ran out of room, but that does leave that corner looking rather interesting. And once again the main stand is a detached triple-tiered stand. Actually it's only partially detached. It's an interesting ground, this one. Brøndby Stadion, Brøndby. This one's a little more straightforward. Besides the front entrance that makes use of plenty of glass, there isn't much of a facade to speak of, just bare concrete. But those diamond-shaped structures that support the roof are a nice touch. One interesting aspect of the interior is that the corners only have a top tier of seating, so you can actually see right through to the outside. Stade Louis II, AS Monaco. It's one of the more extraordinary exterior designs going round. They obviously didn't want to stick out like a sore thumb in what is one of the more spectacular cities in the world. And I'll tell you what definitely doesn't stand out, the basketball arena underneath the stadium, which is pretty cool. As for the stadium's interior, it's pretty interesting, I'll give it that, but it's also slightly odd. Are these arches for looks, or do they have a purpose? I guess we'll never know. Philips Stadion, PSV. It's not just sponsored by Philips, but was actually commissioned by the company way back in the early 20th century. In fact, the P in PSV stands for Philips, which is a screwdriver company if I'm not mistaken. It's quite a visually striking stadium nowadays, particularly the exterior. But perhaps my favourite design feature are those corners. Well, two of them. They have 4 or 5 tiers of seating. Reale Arena, Real Sociedad. A few years ago it underwent a major renovation that gave it this blue translucent exterior, reminiscent of an early 2000s Apple computer. But unlike a computer, there are no chips or anything on the inside, just patatas bravas. The renovation also completely transformed it from a meh stadium with a track into a world-class football-specific stadium, and a pretty good looking one at that. Merkur Arena, Sturm Graz. Interestingly, it used to be named after Arnold Schwarzenegger, which seems strange, I know, but he was born nearby. Unlike Arnold, this stadium keeps a low profile. It has a fairly unassuming concrete exterior, and on the inside it's basically as simple as you can get. Well, perhaps not as simple as the plot lines to most Schwarzenegger films. Kindergarten Cop being the exception to the rule. It's not a tumor. It's not a tumor. It's not a tumor. It's not a tumor. Stadio Diego Armando Maradona, Napoli. A more appropriate person to name your stadium after, I would have thought. This one definitely doesn't keep a low profile. I love the imposing exterior consisting of that exposed metal and concrete. And after recent renovations, the interior is looking spectacular. done up in Napoli's colours. Even the track was changed to match. King Power Stadium, Leicester City. King Power is a Thai company, which is interesting because the King of Thailand is struggling to stay in power. It's not relevant, I know, but I'm just getting in the Thailand political commentary that you've all come to expect from this channel. The stadium is pretty much exactly what you'd expect if I told you it was a medium-sized English football stadium built in the early 2000s. There's nothing at all wrong with it, it's a perfectly fine stadium, but a dozen other clubs in England had the same idea. Otkritie Arena, Spartak Moscow. Moscow has a ton of great stadiums, but I think this might be my favourite. I love that tile-like facade, and not too many stadiums have a larger video board on the exterior than on the interior. Nevertheless, it's still quite flashy on the inside, especially the 3 floors of luxury suites, which is probably the place to be on a cold night in Moscow, just chilling with the oligarchs, drinking some vodka, or whatever they drink in Russia. They have vodka there, right? Stadion Wojska Polskiego, Legia Warsaw. It says 1930 is the date of opening, but really this is just a 10-year-old stadium. Very little remained of the old one after the rebuild. It has a concrete exterior for the most part, including the only remnant of the old stadium, as well as an interesting fabric roof. The interior is fairly standard, but I love this little corner section of skyboxes. Karaiskakis Stadium, Olympiakos. It's the biggest football-specific stadium in Greece, and arguably the best. The exterior, although somewhat bare bones, looks incredible with that red tubular steel that rises up from the ground and supports the roof. And it has some red seats to match. It's a fairly simple stadium, but sometimes that's a good thing. Deutsche Bank Park, Eintracht Frankfurt. Surrounded by forest on the outskirts of Frankfurt is the stadium that wouldn't be described as simple. It has a retractable roof, albeit a fabric one that runs along cables and folds into that suspended video board. A cool feature for sure. And I believe it was the first stadium in the world with that setup, but don't quote me on that. Actually, don't quote me on anything, it's a surefire way to lose all credibility. Ulka Stadium, Fenerbahce. It's one of Istanbul's many top-notch stadiums. It was actually the largest stadium in Turkey at one time, which isn't surprising because it was actually the first football stadium in Turkey. Nowadays, it's not even close to being the biggest, however, it's still a solid stadium. I like that alternating yellow and navy blue seating. Man, all this talk of Turkey and Greece, I'm craving a turkey burger. Bossal Stadion, Antwerp. It looks like we've come at a bad time, unless the construction site aesthetic is in fashion at the moment. But no, these shots were taken during the recent renovation. It's now looking like this, much better. It really is an incredible upgrade when you compare it to what it used to look like just a few years back. Chalk and cheese, really. Stadio Olimpico, Lazio. There are quite a few stadiums in the world that look more or less the same from the outside, but where this stadium is a little more unique is the interior, where a single tier of seating curves its way around 3/4 of the stadium, which is very uncommon in a European football stadium of this size, at least nowadays. I kinda like it. RZD Arena, Lokomotiv Moscow. I love the synergy of the naming rights sponsor and the team. RZD is Russian Railways and Lokomotiv, well, I think you can translate that for yourself. And it could be just me, but those skyboxes up top even look like a train. In terms of the stadium's non-train related features, those concrete A-frames in each corner that support the roof are a nice addition. Stylish and functional. Orange Velodrome, Marseille. Now I mentioned that many consider Groupama Stadium to be the best stadium in France, but I think this one gets even more praise, particularly for its atmosphere. It is, after all, the biggest club football stadium in the country. The exterior is certainly very unusual, as is the seating layout to an extent, some of which is very steep, particularly those in the western stand, which helps to create that intimidating atmosphere. What a fantastic stadium. Turk Telekom Stadium, Galatasaray. This one's bigger than the one we saw earlier, but it's still not the biggest stadium in Istanbul. It was initially intended to become Turkey's only retractable roof stadium, but those plans didn't eventuate. You might be thinking, why would they need a retractable roof anyway? Isn't it a nice warm climate? Well, it's easy to forget, but it actually snows in Istanbul. Anyway, I love the Gryffindor-inspired interior. I never knew Harry Potter was popular in Turkey. There is of course a chance that that's just the club's colours, but either way it looks great. Stadio Municipal de Braga. Braga. I'm going to go ahead and assume that this is the most extraordinary setting for a stadium that you'll see in this video. Carved into the side of a mountain on the site of a former quarry, with a rocky cliff forming the wall of one of the sides, even utilising the rock face to mount the video board up top. It comes as no surprise that it has earned numerous design awards. It's not just the location that makes the stadium unique, but the roof canopies partially support each other's weight via these cables that cross over the top of the field. Stadion Rajko Mitic, Red Star Belgrade. This big sunken bowl is by far the biggest stadium in Serbia, and thus acts as the national stadium as well. It's known for its incredibly intimidating atmosphere. It has in the past hosted crowds of well over 100,000, but not since the bucket seats were installed. The asymmetrical design offers those sitting on the western side a bit of a panoramic view of Belgrade, which is always nice. Huvefama Arena, Ludogorets Razgrad. There are heaps of stadiums in Bulgaria, but most are a little run down and or have a running track. This stadium, however, rebuilt about a decade ago, was a welcome change. Although it's not even close to being the biggest stadium in Bulgaria, it has a good argument for being considered the best in the country. It's nothing fancy, just a simple clean design consisting of an individual stand on each side. But that's many people's ideal stadium. MCH Arena, Midtjylland. In many ways it's a typical Scandinavian stadium. Yes, there are quite a few with more spectacular designs, but in this region even the tiny stadiums tend to be top quality, stylish and modern. And that describes MCH Arena quite well. But I've got to say I'm quite disappointed that they didn't use any Danish building materials. I don't see one block of Lego in this stadium. Support local guys, come on. Bayer Arena, Bayer Leverkusen. That oval-shaped roof is a little misleading because the structure itself is rectangular. Speaking of the roof, I love how perfectly translucent it is, therefore there are no dark and dingy corners in this stadium. Unlike most stadiums in Europe, the skyboxes are all behind the southern end, rather than along the sideline. And look how small that top tier of seating is to the north. A very interesting stadium, this one. Celtic Park, Celtic. It's a great example of a very old stadium that has seamlessly transformed into a very modern stadium, while still retaining some elements of the old design. When I say seamlessly, they did actually bulldoze most of it in the 90s. But the south stand stayed intact and this C-shaped section with the huge roof canopy was added. But the old and new blends well together. It actually kinda looks like Old Trafford and St James's Park combined, which is certainly no bad thing. Estadio Benito Villamarin, Real Betis. On the surface it's your typical Spanish stadium, with only the smallest section of covered seating. But something that certainly sets it apart is that it does have some of the most spectacular seat art there is. Okay, it's just a man, but it's a big man. Also, the main stand is actually detached, so it's not quite a complete bowl like their crosstown rivals. Groupama Arena, Ferencvárosi. I often use the word sleek to describe a modern stadium, But this is sleek AF. I said AF. Why was that bleeped? It has a beautiful metallic exterior, but you could say the interior is even better. It consists of continuous seating on 3 sides and a somewhat separate stand that houses the luxury suites on the other. All done up in a striking shade of green. Stadion Maksimir, Dinamo Zagreb. An interesting looking stadium, very blue. It does actually have a running track, but that's being covered with artificial turf, also very blue. It's pretty cool how the west stand forms the roof of the stand of the adjacent stadium, and I love how steep that north stand is. That was necessary due to the road that it backs onto. It's not a bad stadium for what it is. RZD Arena? Genk? Why you gotta complicate it, Belgium? Firstly, I'm a fan of the exterior. That muted blue roof with a grey facade works well. And oddly enough, the roof of the adjacent reserve stadium is attached to this stadium. Kinda like the last one. And much like Philips Stadion that we saw earlier on, 2 of the corners have this quadruple tier design, stacked on top of each other. It just looks cool, like an opera house or something. London Stadium, West Ham United. It's perhaps the most hated Premier League stadium, but it's not actually that bad. People don't like that it's not fully rectangular. But compared to some stadiums we've seen so far in this video, the gap between the stands and the field is fairly small. One aspect I like is that the zigzag framework that you saw on the facade is actually carried over to the interior where the floodlights are held. A small detail, I know, but it looks good. Allianz Stadion, Rapid Wien. I guess you could say the exterior is somewhat similar to Leicester's stadium, but what a difference some added colour makes. You might be wondering what the deal is with this stray floodlight tower over here. Well, that's a remnant of the old stadium that occupied the site, and was left as a reminder of the past. Lovely interior as well. It's just a single tier all round, but it looks stunning. The final will actually be held at Estadio Ramon Sanchez Pizjuan, a neutral venue, although if Real Betis gets through to the final, it will be in their home city, albeit in their rival stadium. I already talked about this stadium in the Champions League video, so I'll leave it there. That's it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, have a good one.